Weird Way Media.
Welcome to Of Mushrooms and Men, a Last of Us podcast. I am one of your hosts, Chris Dashu, the host of the Culture Cast, and I'm joined by my good friend. He is one of the hosts of Game of Bros, House of Dragons, another show where we talk about HBO TV. Your friend and mine, Yashar. Is that the...
I'm a clicker now.
Oh, I don't remember what that is because apparently this is a completely different show now. We're talking about the third episode of The Last of Us. Oh my God. It's quite possibly the gayest hour of television you've ever seen on a network show. The episode is titled Long, Long Time. It's directed by Peter Hoare and written by Craig Mazin, and I would say it stars Pedro Pascal and Bella Ramsey, but not really. This episode is more focused on Nick Offerman and Murray Bartlett as Bill and Frank, two men who find one another on the edge of a pandemic. And we'll just go from there. We're going to be talking spoilers. I think if you've watched this show, if you're kind of in tune with the press surrounding the show, everybody has gone apeshit for this episode. Like hardcore.
People love it.
Yeah. So I'm going to kick it to you, Yashar. What did you think of the episode?
First off, did you see White Lotus season 1?
I have not.
Because Murray Bartlett is the absolute MVP of this. And one thing I learned listening to an interview with
wait. You asked if I've seen White Lotus?
Yeah.
I've seen one. Kate watched the show, and I saw him in the show a little bit.
Okay. He's unbelievable. Like, this dude should be in everything. But I found out he was actually cast in this prior to White Lotus season 1 coming out. So it's just a happy coincidence. But anyways, I think we're going to be seeing a lot more of him because he's quite the performer.
Not in this show, though. Not in this show. We're not going to be seeing a single moment of him.
I meant, last week we talked about, are we going to get a cold open every episode? So we didn't in this episode, but we did get a flashback. So
the whole episode's kind of a cold open, frankly.
They've had a flashback in every episode now. So, and we did see Anna Torv's test in it because we had said, it seemed unlikely we wouldn't just ever see her again in the whole season. So it's nice, that she's still getting checks. So this probably diverges from the game more so than anything we've seen so far. So we have Bill, who's like a survivalist kind of prepper, Second Amendment dude. Who probably doesn't have a lot of friends, and he's well equipped to survive a situation like this. And actually, I have thought myself, it would be good to know a couple of survivalists in case shit hits the fan. You never know. I'm not being facetious. I've generally had this thought. And so he's living this life of solitude, and I don't want to say happiness, but he's content and just watching zombies or infected get killed and have this weird little
don't call them zombies. Stop calling them zombies. This isn't a zombie show, okay? It looks like a zombie show. It sounds like a zombie show, but it's not a zombie show. We promise. Signed, Craig Mazin and Neil Druckmann.
and so obviously he comes across this stranger, Murray Bartlett's Frank, and they fall in love and live together for a really long time, and
16 years, right?
No.
Yeah, because it's 4 years in, and then it's 4 years in is when he meets him, and then it's another 16 years because they're effectively, the way the episode ends is it's been maybe a couple weeks type thing. It's not made clear how long it takes for Joel and Bella to get to them and effectively find them, but they're together a long time. This reminded me a lot of Game of Thrones. Once again, we can't stay in one place too long, but here it works, I think, to tell their story. But I'm going to be honest with you, and this is my issue with this episode. This show hasn't earned this fucking episode yet. We're on the third episode of this show, and this is where you're going? Come on, guys. You haven't earned this yet. You watched Westworld, right? You watched through the second season of the show. You know what episode this reminded me of? This reminded me of the Kiksuya episode from the second season. Yeah. And that show, as much as you may not like it, it earned that episode. It set up all the disparate pieces and brought them together. Here, I appreciate the story that they're telling. It's a great story, but why can't you make me care about Joel and Ellie as much as I cared about these two characters? Why?
I think
it's hard for me to kind of separate that, because the narrative so far that I've been watching, I'm not super invested in, but I would have watched an entire show of just them. And that's a problem for a show that's expecting me to now continue on with my other characters that were in this episode for 10 minutes total.
Well, I think we have a couple of things. The show opens with like a discussion on Tess, right? Or the episode, the discussion about Tess, and Joel kind of does a little memorial towards her. And you could just look at it and say like, oh, what's this disparate thing? But it's actually very related, because it's the story of a person who he thinks life is almost like just a thing to pass through.
Sure.
And you realize it's like worth living for someone else.
Yeah. They're trying to, between Bill and Joel. I get it.
And like Joel
show hasn't earned it yet. It hasn't earned this emotional moment that it's trying to show us, because we don't care about the characters from the show proper yet. Like what have they given us to really hang a hat on with Joel and Ellie? That's clear. We're clearly going there. Their relationship is building, but I feel like you're showing me right here and now that you can write compelling characters. So why are you? This should have been like end of the first season, maybe even. I was talking to Father Malone about this. Maybe even the first episode of the second season. But it's just like you're really giving us a lot here to unpack, which I appreciate. But your main characters are sidelined already, and you've told a more compelling story without them. That is kind of a problem. Even if we like this episode, it is kind of a problem this early in the show. I
don't know if I agree with you. I think that,
I mean, again, this is purely subjective, mind you. There's nothing. Again, this is how I perceive a way to tell the story should go, because I would love to have written this episode, but I personally would not have put it third in your season, because there needs to be time with Ellie and Joel to grow as characters. Because again, it feels like they already know that we should know these characters, like we're video game players. And the problem is, the assumption for this show is that most people aren't, or who is the audience? Because if you're a video game player, I don't need to flesh out Joel and Ellie because you know what their relationship is. But if I'm not, you really need to give us like a bunch of scenes with them getting to know one another. And I know that it's going to do it over the entire run of the show, but they've just shown that they don't have to do that. They can just have two characters sitting in a scene together and give us beautifully written dialogue that gives us a window into these characters' lives like we haven't gotten with anybody else. It's kind of a problem. Good problem to have, I guess.
It works as a good inflection point, because right now we know Joel struggles to let people in, right?
Right. Oh, yeah.
And we as an audience need to understand how someone like that could be convinced to let someone in. And Bill and Joel are like one and the same. And we see that in the scene with him and Tess and Frank, where Joel's basically like, I see what you're doing. You're a protector like me. You know, that's really all we can do. But if you really want to protect, like, you can't do it on your own. And Bill softens and sees like the love that Joel has for Tess at that point. And that's kind of like after Joel's already failed his daughter, right?
Right.
And so then he has Tess. And then I don't think he actually fails Tess, but he believes he's failed her now. And so all he has left is Ellie. And from that point on, that's the inflection point. You can kind of see when he's reading the letter where he's like, shit, like, this can't just be about me anymore.
Right.
And I think it's set the stage where we're going to see him sort of soften and become closer. And to your point, if we have only seen Joel and Ellie interact in the context that they had so far, and this was like, let's say, the last episode of the season, I think I would agree with you. But because there's actually a lot of runway for the impact of this to play out, and it will play out, I could feel pretty confident saying it will play out, it will pay off. And then separately, I know you said like, well, why is this happening now? It is generally following like the story of the game, which some could argue like doesn't mean it has to. But about this point in the game, they do interact with. It is different, so they actually interact with Bill. So I can get some game spoilers. So it's a similar thing. They go to find Bill, who works with Joel and like the QZ. He and Frank were lovers. Like, that's all true. You don't really meet Frank. Frank's actually dead by the time you run into Bill. he's hung himself because he's been infected. And actually, he's left Bill because Bill's too much like a prepper, like narrow, rigid survivalist. And he basically resents him and says, like, I hate your guts, and leaves. And that's how he gets infected. And so Bill doesn't die either. He's just completely alone, but he's completely alone by the end of your interaction with him, which, some could argue is worse than death. And in the interview I listened with Neil Druckmann, he said one of the reasons they thought this change made sense was in the context of a game, you couldn't just have like an hour cutscene of like Bill and Frank and like no action. You have to be doing something.
Right.
So like you have to build around it, which is why Joel is like working with this. But in the context of a show, you have a little bit more flexibility. So you still have this like Bill and Frank dynamic, but we get to see it play out on screen. And I would argue, even though Bill dies in this version, he probably has a happier ending than he has in the game.
Well, they get to be the masters of their own fate, which we don't ever really see in this kind of media. In post-apocalyptic media, most of the time it's, we're sitting in a corner together and I've got a gun and I shoot you in the head and I shoot myself in the head and that's it. Shaun of the Dead trafficked in that up until the end of the movie where it kind of ejector seats itself. All these post-apocalyptic things tend to put characters in that scenario and then either they die or the last, the 13th hour, they get saved. I appreciate that this story goes, no, we're going to set the limits. The characters know their own limitations and what they want out of this relationship and who they expect to be and who they want to be. And I like that it only makes sense that Bill and Frank end up together in bed dead. Like it makes sense because. And
they're old. And it's not like they're like Frank says, Bill says, like, I'm old. Like, I've had a good life. I'm happy. Yeah. Like,
I lived a good life. Like, I don't need anything else. And I think that I have a hard time with this episode because this show hasn't shown me that it deserves an episode this good yet. Do you know what I mean? Do you know what I mean, though? Like, again, just take a step back from the show and assume that the show will not stumble and it will be a show worth watching for a second season. Not by the end of it, us going, man, I will stick around because I've seen the first season, but that the show will land the first season. It'll get to that point, just like it did with Game of Thrones, House of the Dragon, a show that neither one of us were fucking interested in watching. By the end of it, you and I were like, fuck, I am on board with whatever you throw at us second season. I'm not sure I'm going to get there with this show the way it's going so far because I don't understand what the narrative is. And I think that goes to what you were talking about already with the cold opens. The show feels like it wants to tell the whole story of the world and Joel and Ellie's place in it, which is fine. But Joel and Ellie they haven't seemed as much of a presence in their own show yet as I was expecting them to be, given that they're literally the main characters of the narrative in the video game. Does that make sense? And again, maybe this is just a third episode gripe, but I would have expected in this third episode, we'd continue to see Joel and Ellie's character being built out, not them going, oh, we're taking a sidestep to these other characters that you've never met before. Because again, I appreciate that they had a good idea. I watched the after episode like you did, and Neil Druckmann and Craig Mazin were like, if you have a great idea, maybe you can pivot for an episode. And it's like, yeah, you can. Just not your third episode. Because again, this episode theoretically may have been sent to people watching it early. Like if they're watching this early and this is the first 3 episodes, by the end of this episode, you're just like, all right, so are they now getting to the adventure part of this show?
But I guess is the show like it's almost
this adds more questions for me for what the show is trying to be than it answers.
But I also think like just go along for the ride. Like I feel like you want the answer now.
No, I don't want. I want there to be coherent storytelling about the main characters of your show that you keep showing me are the main characters. But I would rather watch a Bill and Frank show at this point. And that's after one episode. But
it is coherent. Like you have a person who was closed off, wanted nothing, opened up, had like a beautiful love story.
Right.
And then you have Joel, who like is clearly an analog to Bill, and he's except the difference is Bill never had anything. Joel at one point did. And we actually did spend a lot of time with Joel in episode 1, if you remember. It was in a different time period.
But all of the things that we saw in this episode were for our benefit, not for the characters. Joel doesn't know about Bill and Frank and any of the things that they've gone through. And again, we're assuming that by Bella Ramsey, Jesus Christ, by Ellie reading that note to Joel, he'll go, oh my God, I've had this epiphany. And like, that is how that works in the context of this kind of narrative, because it's a show, but in real life, in the thing they're trying to emulate, it's just it's a little hinky. It just kind of is. Because like they could have shown us Joel and Ellie's relationship growing without having to give us an analog. Like, what's the point of giving us an analog this early in the show? I get it, but like, just show us them coming to that realization, not through the eyes of someone else who they're not seeing other than one time.
Joel starts though to get that messaging from Tess before she dies, right? Like the hope, like it's not like it comes from nowhere. And you do see Joel softening a little bit, like he's like explaining the history of the world to Ellie and about planes and talking, and he even wants to shield her from like the field of dead bodies,
which is horrifying. That we barely even get to sit with that in the show.
Yeah,
is that from the game? Do they talk about the government just like killing healthy people? Because like that feels like a real drastic step that the show takes. I mean,
it is basically what they do to his daughter, right, in the first episode, and that is from the game. So maybe it's not like as explicit as they were just mowing down like fields and fields of people. I honestly don't remember if that is, but and they kind of talk about. He's like when Frank and Bill in that one scene are having a argument. He's like, "You think the government are Nazis?" He's like, "They are Nazis." He's like, and then Frank says, "Well, now they are, but they weren't back then." And I thought that was like quite funny dialogue, but it does say like,
but they are Nazis, right? Like,
yeah, now he's talking, but
and are we being led to believe, again, not played a lot of the video game, are we led to believe in the context of the narrative of the show that, because in the game, the government is what? What is the government by 2023?
I mean, it's kind of like Fedra. Like, it's unclear if there's like a president or anything like that. I'm sure there's some sort of centralized power, but it does seem that you have almost like these, like the QZs are sort of self-managed by parts of Fedra, but Fedra like is federal. They don't get into like super about the politics of it, but basically it's like the trade-off is you get some stability, safety for like, you know,
as long as you can.
Occasionally oppressive regimes, and like they will ice you if like you give any lip. So I'd be interested if we get more of that, because we haven't got a lot of the Fireflies either, and we get a decent amount of the Fireflies in the game. So I wonder if you'll get to see a bit of that political context. I don't think it's necessary, but it could add a little bit of world building. Like even if we got like a cold open with Fedra, I think could be cool. Kind of see like what's going on in their mind, because as we saw with that original guard that Joel killed, like some of them are just kind of normal people trying to survive and do their own thing too. So it is interesting.
I do wonder because again, I mean, we have this in the show is taking its own direction. Obviously, I mean, like you said, with this episode, it has changed the narrative for one of the characters completely.
The end point is similar. It's quite similar with Joel and Ellie, like in a car.
But the other stuff is completely concocted for the show. It's not in the game, even if it's kind of hinted at. Right. It's hinted at in the game that Bill and Frank had a life together, blah, 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 blah. The show shows it, which I think is very smart, but it's just going to go down as a really good episode of this show. And I wonder if the show will be as good as this episode is. And that's always a concern. Because, I mean, second season of Westworld has one of the best episodes of television I've ever seen. And you don't like that season of Westworld, and you don't like Westworld. I
do like that episode.
But you don't like that season of Westworld at all. And see, that's my point. It's like, how do you reconcile the two? It's a great episode of a show, but the fucking show stinks. So what does that mean? Does the episode then suffer because of the context that it's placed in? Could it have, again, you look at something like Guillermo del Toro's Cabinet of Curiosities, right? No through line between any of the episodes. It's a standalone episode, standalone narrative. You could have taken this script and done it there just as easily. Again, it's just you're telling a story taking place during a zombie apocalypse. Doesn't have to be the clickers. It doesn't even we never even see them interacting with the infected. They interact with humans more than they interact with the infected.
You see a few of them like is trapped, but
they're not into the wall, they're not into their house, they're not having a fight with the clickers or anything. So it could be in any post-apocalyptic setting that you want. They're telling this beautiful love story, but it has no bearing on the narrative. And so you could take this episode. I mean, what do Ellie and Joel get by the end of the episode? A car. That's right. They get the car and they get the guns.
Ellie gets a gun. And then, Joel, I think it starts to click into place. Like that Ellie is his penance, his chance to he's messed up not once, but twice.
Right.
His daughter, Tess. And if he's really a protector, like Bill was, Bill was there till the end, gave everything, and Joel saw himself in Bill just as much as Bill saw himself in Joel. Like they, had an uneasy friendship, kind of pissed each other off.
He says he wasn't his friend. He's like, I don't like you, but you're my friend, maybe.
Yeah. He's like, okay, this is my chance to, do what Bill did, but I've not been able to successfully do myself. And I mean, what did you think about just like the way they showed them over the years? And like, especially, I think the coolest, well, it's sad, the transition between young Frank and old Bill and like how that changed after the last time jump.
So all of my kind of issues with the episode aside, in the scheme of this narrative that they're telling with the show, Nick Offerman and Murray Bartlett are fucking amazing. They're turning in performances that, again, like the show doesn't deserve in a way. It's like they don't even like, they don't deserve to be associated with the show because of how good the performances are, because of how good the writing is and how believable they are. I mean, look, Nick Offerman is straight, not gay at all. And you know what? I would not have known that. It's beyond convincing. The two of them work together. It doesn't feel like a put on. It doesn't feel like this is somehow a forced gay relationship or that there's a kind of disparity in power between the two. There's none of that. It feels really like a genuine relationship. And I think for me, as someone who's gay, I really appreciate that this is on fucking network television. We're showing a genuine gay relationship between two male older men. When do you ever see that? Tell me the last time you saw two gay men in their late 50s, early 60s on screen together. Like, and not in like a
White
joke.
Lotus season 2.
Okay, haven't watched it. So there you go. But my point is, like, most of the time it's often played for laughs, or it's an older guy and a younger guy, and isn't that weird? But like, this is just, it's played so straight, unironically, like no pun intended, but it's played so straight with just a sincerity to it that is shocking. It's so sincere, right? Like,
do you think it's the most BPK you've ever seen? Beard per kiss?
So much chest hair and kissing and beards and
so much beard. I
just love how uncomfortable Nick Offerman looks, because it's if you read anything or listen to the audio podcast or do any amount of inquiring on the episode afterwards, Nick Offerman was about as uncomfortable as humanly possible doing any of this. But I think it really adds to what we're seeing, which is a man not okay with himself, learning to be okay with himself. Like,
yeah, because Bill himself is like closeted and uncomfortable. And
I guess he's closeted. I mean, I don't.
Well, not to say closeted is like no one knew. It's like it seems like he's just never maybe even been with anyone, or like never even tried. Like, so who knows if he was like embarrassed about like being found out, or just he just didn't feel comfortable putting himself out there because he was afraid of rejection, and it was like counter to like he was clearly like a very specific type of person who probably wouldn't generally be LGBTQ friendly.
No. They would not. He might be a conservative homosexual, but he's not invited to the conservative table. No.
Yeah. So,
which I think, I mean, again, they don't really, you know, what's more surprising? They don't really like beach over the head with that, which I felt like could have been like a beach over the head moment where it's like, oh, he's kind of like a prepper, but he's also gay. Like, isn't that weird? And it's like, I'm glad you're not bringing attention to it in a way that he's like gay.
Independent things. He's a prepper and he's also gay.
Yeah.
And he meets this guy and he falls in love with him. And they have like probably as good of a run as you can have in this environment. Like, honestly, I think
they were living a normal life for fucking almost 20 years. Like,
and they did have friends like Joel and Tess would come and like hang out. And I'm sure there's other people in the years intervening too. And so it's like, yeah.
We only saw like 5 moments of a 20-year span. You know, we have to, as audience members, we fill in those gaps with all the things they must have been doing. And because like you said, by the end of it, by that moment where you've gone about as far forward as we can go, which is effectively catching up to the live narrative, we see Bill and Frank. And I guess Frank must have MS or Parkinson's or something. A terminal illness that cannot be fixed.
The creator said, like, it didn't really matter what it was. And it doesn't matter. But yeah.
When he says they couldn't solve it when we were on the beginning of the pandemic part of this, don't expect anybody's going to solve it now that they've got other things to worry about. You kind of get what they're getting at. I appreciate where the narrative goes, because those last couple scenes together are not sad. I don't think the word I would use is sad. They're kind of bittersweet. I mean, again, you see these two men at the end of their lives kind of willingly accepting what's happening. And in a way, like we kind of said before, they get to be the architects of their own conclusion, which in these narratives, that's not a thing. They're normally lying bloody, dead, or infected, having to, he's not your husband anymore. Like, I mean, where's that scene? Like, I'm glad we don't get it, because fuck that. Like, that shit's so played out at this point. Like, I don't want a character have to make a decision to kill his significant other. Like, that's not pleasant for anyone to watch.
I mean, we almost sort of had it when they're invaded by the Raiders and Bill's shot. And he's like going through all of his planning. He's like, oh, here's where the keys are, and here's the notes, and call Joel. And in that moment, it says like, oh, he really does trust Joel. Like, he thinks that's the person who can save Frank. And he goes to all these things, and that's like a moment where their roles are reversed, and Frank is the one who saves him and takes care of him and brings him back to life. And I think it kind of emphasizes how, despite being very different kinds of people, they work. Would they have worked outside of this context of like the world ending? Maybe, maybe not. But I'd like to believe that it could have worked, and like it was just a real relationship. Like he's like the little thing. Like, Frank was just the light that Bill wasn't. But
right,
it was just a joy to watch. Like when he went to when Bill takes Frank to the strawberry patch.
That was a genuine moment. That
Bill.
Was a genuine moment.
And it was at that point they've been together a while, right? Like they know each other. Like it's not a new love. It's like I know you. Like I see you. There's like we don't have to bullshit. And he's like, how did you get the seeds? Like, I traded with Joel. I was like, what did you trade? He's like, a gun, a little one. But it's just like one of those things where early in the relationship that would probably set off a lot of things. When he's like, I get it. Like, I'll give up this thing for my partner because I know it makes him happy. And then he embraces with his partner and eats the strawberry, and he's like, oh yeah, this is beautiful.
That laugh that Nick Offerman gives it feels real.
Yeah.
Like, that whole scene feels real. Anytime they're together, it feels real. And the casting, I mean, you got to give credit to the casting. I've seen Nick Offerman in all of nothing. You have to understand that. No, not a Parks and Recs fan. I don't like cringe humor, that stuff. Cringe humor is not funny to me. I can't laugh at it because, like, it's just, I've watched The Office and I know that's not something that motivates me in the world of comedy. And I know Parks and Rec is very much in the same vein. So
less cringe humory, but
right.
But definitely but if you don't like The Office, you're probably not going to like Parks.
And also, I'm not going to watch something that has Chris Pratt in it, regardless of what era Chris Pratt it was, because he's just Koopas. Okay. All right, Chris, we get it. You're literally a complete shill at this point. I mean, he is. I'm not being mean. Why are you cast as Mario, pal? Like, what do you bring to the table? Let me check my notes. Mario on the, what was that? Nintendo? Is that what it's called? Like, come on, bro.
I mean, we're all going to see it.
I'm going to see it, but not for Chris Pratt. And frankly, I'm going to see it in spite of Chris Pratt being in it, which I feel like is most people. Speaking of video game adaptations, why isn't he in this? Just walks on screen and gets shot in the head. Okay, bye.
There's another thing we haven't talked about. Like, we spent a lot of time with this. We still haven't really spent much time with Tommy as well. I'm interested to see, like,
seen him at all.
The first episode.
Well, but I haven't seen him at all. Yeah. I mean, we haven't seen him at all in the present live narrative.
So I'm interested to see his dynamic mesh with Joel and Ellie as well. But I think, to your complaint or concern,
it's just an observation.
I think if it was the end of the season and we never got the time with Joel and Ellie, I think it would be valid. I think because there's still a lot of time for it to breathe.
I hope
I'm a less compelled by it. But yeah,
but you understand where I'm coming from, though, right?
Yeah.
Like, this is a big moment that the show is showing off, and it's a moment that the writers of the show worked really hard on, and they want us to walk away from this episode with an emotional impact that stays with us. And I just feel like putting it here kind of gets in the way of the bigger story at hand, which is Joel and Ellie's relationship. Because again, if you've played the video game, you know what Joel is willing to sacrifice for Ellie. It's not a fucking surprise. And I would have liked the narrative to get there on its own without having it go, well, there are other people who are doing it, so why don't you get it? It's like, you know what I mean? Like I don't know. Back to the point of Nick Offerman and Murray Bartlett. Nick Offerman, who I've seen in nothing, I don't know any of his comedic whatever stylings.
Yeah.
He is fantastic in this episode.
Yeah.
It's believable beyond words. And again, as someone who's a heterosexual man playing a gay character who went out of his way to speak with other gay men about that relationship and what that would mean to see that on screen, I appreciate that because that shows a level of foresight on Nick Offerman's part. And most actors, I mean, I'm not saying most actors aren't going to do that, but that takes a special kind of actor to say, I want to do this right, because I know people are going to take issue with it if it's not realistic. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it needs to be realistic.
Yeah. And I mean, Murray Bartlett is a gay man, and he's
one actual gay man. Yeah.
And he's Australian, a pretty good American accent.
Very believable American accent.
So I think Neil Druckmann was saying like he kind of helped guide some of the interactions and way they conversed and things like that. So it felt very real. And I mean, that's acting, right? Like,
yeah,
like Nick Offerman was literally like playing someone as far removed from himself. Well, he's into carpentry and stuff, so maybe
Nick Offerman. I mean, you know, he still likes to build things. So
yeah. But yeah. So and I think in a show like this, in which we're probably going to have a lot of dark times, it's nice that these little moments of optimism and hope remind us that it's not just an oppressive moment to moment survival. Like there is something to live for and something more than just living to the next day.
Right.
And I think that's what, and yes, it's maybe beating us a little hard over the head, but Joel's finding out that Ellie is that. And even Ellie is treating Joel a little differently. Like she comes out and says like, you know, the Tess thing, it's almost like from a place of defensiveness. Like, oh, I'm not going to apologize for Tess because you guys made the decision, so don't blame me. But obviously she feels bad about that situation. Maybe she's even scared that Joel will resent her. But then she's also like becoming more comfortable where she starts making jokes with him and like picking at him and being an annoying kid. And that's actually straight out of the game where like Ellie is so curious because she's never seen these things before. And she's almost like, yeah, she's reckless because like, yeah, she knows about the infected, but she's never really had to deal with them. And maybe like she's even a little like, I don't know, more like Joel than she thinks. Like when we see her in the arena where she.
Okay, what's up with that? What do you think was going on there?
There's a scene when Joel first goes into the warehouse, however, to get his supplies. Ellie also, they didn't clear the rooms, which I found a little weird. Like the first thing I would do is clear the rooms. But anyway, Ellie goes into this little section that Joel's not in, and there's a trapped, essentially infected. And she goes up to it, and you know, we've all been there with bugs and stuff, and like kind of curiously prods it. And then she stabs it like very like viciously. And I was like, is this, because I think there's two ways you could initially think of that. Is it her almost doing it out of compassion? Like, you know, this is a horrible existence. I don't want to leave them here. But then I think you see her face and it's almost a more like anger and vindictive, like
it's anger. I mean, it's anger. Yeah.
It's a darkness. And I think it's something that's maybe supposed to show us that much like Joel has a darkness for different reasons. Like they might be more similar in spirit than either of them would acknowledge. Whereas Ellie probably wouldn't ever say she's as rough as Joel, and Joel would never say like he has like a softness or curiosity like Ellie does. But I think they both have a little bit of each other, much like Bill and Frank, right?
Right. I think that scene's interesting with Ellie and the infected, but again, like you just said, like to what end, right? I reserve judgment because again, I don't know if they're going to expound upon it in further episodes and kind of give us, because like you said, I mean, even though I've never played all the way through the game, I know the depths to which the narrative kind of delves into serious, brutal consequences for your actions. Like I know some of the beats to the story, and the character of Ellie is not this precocious child in the second game at all.
No. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I'm not sure if they're
again. Right.
She's like, an adult and like a full adult.
Right. In the second game, she's not this character anymore. So we don't know to what ends the show embraces that portion of the game, and
like, are we seeing that already? I don't. Or is it just? or is it just showing us that there's more to her than is externally? Like, I think there's a few different ways. It doesn't necessarily have to be like she does this and now she's just killing random people because she's secretly like a sociopath or whatever. Like, I don't think the show needs to do that. That could be a route it goes, but I think it's more to just kind of flesh out the edges. But yeah, we'll see if this through line goes anywhere.
But it's interesting because, again, like you said, I mean, I could see it as, oh, poor thing, trapped, let me kill it, but not the role. That was not the sense I was getting from what Bella Ramsey was doing.
Not her facial expressions and like the way she was. It wasn't like a fear or sadness. It was like a joy. Joy is maybe too far, but something closer to that.
She was not enjoying killing that thing. And again, I mean, maybe it's just as much as like I've spent the 14 years of my life running away from these things and having my life upended by them, and now I get the opportunity to stab one. But I don't think it was that either. Again, knowing what I know about the narrative and where it goes in the video game, it would be safe to say this is a thing that they're going to have to address again, if not, almost immediately. Because who knows? Again, I know where the game goes. The show probably is going the same direction, but it has shown it's willing to just throw out what you think and replace it with something, in this case of this episode, a lot better. Because this is better than the video game's handling of Bill, right? It's better because it's more interesting.
It's more interesting from like a viewer's perspective, right. I think. Just give us that. I mean, you could have done the other way, and that would have been a lot more just kind of traditional action.
Would have been a zombie show.
Yeah. And yeah, I don't see like even video game purists really having a problem with this because, like I said, from like an overarching narrative standpoint, it still gets them basically to the same place. Like they're following the same route. It's just now you understand a bit more about other people in this world, and that's something you don't get in the game because when you're playing a video game, like the character who you're playing is their point of view. You're either playing as Joel or Ellie. Like, I mean, because otherwise, what are you doing? But a show gives you that flexibility, and I do like that they're taking full advantage of it. I'm interested to see if they're going to do more of these kind of side stories or fleshing out of characters maybe whom we haven't spent a lot of time with. One comes to mind that I'm thinking like a potential antagonist later on. I'm thinking I wouldn't be surprised if we get some like flashback time with them, and I think you'll enjoy it if what I'm thinking is going to happen. I don't want to get to spoilers just because once again, like since I think they're going to follow the narrative pretty closely, anything I say is essentially
a spoiler.
That happen. Yeah. But there's a lot of interesting characters upcoming.
Well, and even like you said, I mean, this episode, they effectively get to the same place. Like Bill, the character is in a different place, but you don't come back to Bill in the video game. So him being alive or dead is kind of unimportant to you as a game player. And realistically, as a viewer, we might come back to this, but who gives a shit? Like, what is the point of coming back here? You've said everything I feel like you needed to say or wanted to say, and you left it on a pretty poignant moment of looking out the window, which is effectively just them showing the video game's opening title screen. I'm sure you realize that, but that's all that. I mean, like, but it works here. And like, what else is there to say there? And even honestly, even in a lot of ways, like having Ellie find that note feels like maybe gilding the lily a little bit, just a little bit. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like the way this episode ends and the fact that we come back to Joel and Ellie and they go into their house and they see all that stuff. Like, yeah, I get why it's there. I get why we needed it. But like, if it had just been that final shot and that's it, and then the next episode is Ellie and Joel coming to their house and seeing
Billy
like,
Joel.
Yeah, it would have worked just as well. Like this could have been self-contained to its own episode entirely, even. So again, like I think my only concern is this episode gets the show to a height that is here, and if the next episode ain't here. And the next episode ain't here, they've hit their peak on episode 3. I just don't think that's a good idea as a showrunner. If I were running a show, I wouldn't shoot my load the 3rd episode. That's all I'm going to say.
So
unless they've got some,
it's too good too early.
Well, again, it might be is what I'm saying. It might be too good too early.
Did you say it's too fast, too furious?
No, it's too slow, too curious.
Oh, well, there's some curiosity
again,
in this episode.
But you understand what I'm saying, right? Like you get it. Again, it's a concern if it doesn't end up being that way. By the end of the season, I'll go, oh, the season kind of rose to the level of that third episode. But if it never gets back there, we'll be talking about how good this episode was and how kind of middle of the road everything else was. And I just don't know if you want to put yourself in that position in your third episode. And I think it's valid. I think any creator wants to put out something that's maintains a level of quality throughout. And yes, this is about as high a watermark as you can get. My concern is if they drop down way below even where the first or second episode was. I don't know. I'd like to believe Craig Mazin and Neil Druckmann have the show in good hands. I've seen Chernobyl. It worked, but it was also a limited series. You know, it had a definitive end. This show just got renewed for a second season. Surprisingly, said no one. Like, oh, it got renewed for a second season. Yes, it did. I'm surprised it took to the third episode to get there. Yeah, I mean, like, yes, it got a second season. Frankly, I'm surprised that this show didn't have, like, with the Lord of the Rings show, they weren't just like, it's 3 seasons and that's it.
Oh, yeah.
Like,
I do think the one difference is, like, even The Last of Us has a huge fan following. Like, I mean, Lord of the Rings is a proven on-screen thing, whereas there is...
The Last of Us is a proven on-screen thing because it's literally telling the video game without the interactivity. Like, the story of The Last of Us is why people played the game, right?
But I'm saying, like, conceptually, we did talk about, like, video games have, like, a bad rap. So I think that was the only thing stopping them from just saying, like, hey, like backing up the Brinks truck of money and saying... Hey, Pedro Pascal, you know, can you take a break from Grogu and do you want more monies?
Do you want to take a break from Grogu to be with other Grogu?
Grogu
like, number 2.
I think I can do that. But
will I have to be on screen? Like actually on screen, or will it just be me in armor?
He's like, let me talk to my agent. But yeah,
his agent who's cashing checks on his behalf when he's just in a studio recording the voice for the Mandalorian and not. We always talk about.
In the studio or is he on Zoom? Just like,
I don't have a clue, man.
Is he sending voice notes on WhatsApp? They're like, can you redo that take? He's like, oh fuck. He's like, this is the 5th. You know.
Well, can't you guys do anything in post to fix this?
I mean, yeah. I mean, you know, Bill uses Signal, not WhatsApp, but
yeah, bro.
That's a joke that like one person, if I'm lucky, is going to understand.
I use Signal. I use Signal for one thing and one thing only.
What is that one thing?
Buying weed. What did you think it was?
I don't know. I was like, what?
It's encrypted end to end. So
yeah, I got that. I understood that. I thought we were getting into like the prologue of Taken, to be honest.
Oh no, God no! It's not that exciting.
It's like
you have a product that I want, and I don't want to text you through Apple about it. Like, all right.
I use Signal for like my one friend who refuses to use WhatsApp.
That's your one prepper friend.
Yeah, he's not really a prepper. He just is like very like, I don't want my data. And I'm like, all right, bro, this is inconvenient for me, but I'll do it.
Hey, I guess as a fan of the video game, they finally confirmed where the infection came from.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I guess. I mean, again, people will say, oh, that's just a theory, but that's the showrunners telling you what happened. Even if it's I don't know what happened, the fact that they wrote that down and they're saying it, having a character say it, more or less means that's what it is.
No. I think I take that at face value. I mean, you could say like, okay, was it intentional poisoning?
Again, it's not a character saying it. It's a screenwriter writing it.
Well,
so.
It's a Joel, but
but I know, but like, again, when you talk about like any of these like narratives where it's like, where did the thing come from? If they mention where it might have come from, I use that as essentially, you're telling me it's where it came from in no uncertain terms. Like,
and the one thing you could say about The Last of Us is they're not really like, it's not Westworld. It's not like here's what you think it is, and we're subverting all.
Right. This is like pretty one for one.
I mean, they subvert maybe expectations as far as like emotive expectations, like emotional connection, but it's not about like, oh, this is about this. Oh, just kidding, it's aliens. Oh, just kidding, it's a dream. Like that's not. This isn't a what's the word? Mystery box show.
It's not a J.J. Abrams produced show.
No. Yeah. So like they pretty much tell you what's up. I mean, you could maybe have some debates about whether it was an intentional or unintentional infestation of the food supply. It sounds like it's probably like accidental to the first episode, it said right that they evolved because if the temperatures got too hot, sounds like a series of unfortunate events, really.
Yeah. And then everybody started eating pancakes. Like,
yeah.
So
then,
is that so? In the first episode of the show, we see Joel like almost not eat 4 or 5 times. You remember that? Where he's like sitting and about to eat, and then he like doesn't eat.
Oh no, I don't remember. But I wonder if that is like a callback. Like,
I mean, it has to be because there's a bunch of times in the first episode where his daughter is like, "Hey, Dad, like you didn't get the cake." And it's like, what is this all? And now looking back, it's got to be intentional.
Like they're saying, like
he didn't eat.
Close.
Well, yeah. I mean, again, like Joel says it as much in the episode. He's like, people started eating the food on Thursday, and by Friday, people were fucking infected, and by Monday, it was all game over.
Yeah, because
it's 3 days. Like that's 3 fucking days. Like
the bites were wild. So
I guess so. I'm glad that the show kind of finally explains it. And I also like how kind of just not generic, but just like how uninteresting it frankly is. Like it's uninteresting. Like, and the grains were infected. Like, and you know what? If this were to happen that way, that's probably the way it would happen. Just something innocuous.
I like it because it's like, it's simple, but satisfying. You're like, oh, no, makes sense. Like checks out. And
wasn't aliens, wasn't a comet coming to Earth. It was, we did this to ourselves. Ultimately, like that John Hannah cold open kind of says as much. I mean, that's the smartest thing about this show's cold open is the show's cold open essentially says there was never anything anyone could do about this to begin with because you were unwilling to change one minor thing. And now everything has changed because of it. And, you know, again, that maybe is a little too on the nose for our post-COVID times or current COVID times. But the fact that they continue the through line with, and it was just in the food and nobody knew anything about it. Like, I appreciate that. Because again, the game never says. The game just kind of, it's not important to the game. Not that I'm sure it's important here either. So,
yeah.
So,
any final thoughts or anything?
I hope that this is the high watermark that the rest of the show this season holds itself to. I won't be surprised if it doesn't, but rarely does an episode of a show come along like this where it stands out as its own without the show. You could watch this entire Bill and Frank thing and not need to watch the show at all. So that's a success in my book. What about you?
Yeah, no, amazing episode.
Again, we'll see if the show stands up.
Human condition.
Yeah. If that's all it needed to be, it succeeded. I hope that the show keeps up the momentum because it's a pretty big shot in the arm. So next time you hear from us, we're going to be talking about the 4th episode of the first season of The Last of Us. That episode is titled "Please Hold My Hand." So who knows? Clearly getting into some raiders, more human beings being nasty to people. So until then, you can find Yashar and I over at weirdingwaymedia.com, which is the place that we post all of these shows and everything else that we work on. So that's where you can go. As for this show, like, rate, and review on iTunes or wherever you get the show, and we'll catch you on the next episode.